Welcome aboard. This is the Admiral's Almanac, your leadership life connection, bringing leaders from all walks of life into yours so you can take charge, improve your leadership, and improve your life. With the wit and wisdom of your host, Rear Admiral Gary Hall.
And welcome back to the Admiral's Almanac. Today we have a tremendous superstar guest. I think March is the month where we recognize women of distinction. And there's no woman with more distinction than Navy Captain Shaun McAndrew. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on board, and thank you so much for the recognition.
All right, yes, and you did get our fruit basket that we put in the green room, and our limo driver who brought you to the studio said you were one of the nicest individuals that he has had the opportunity to bring here to the Admiral's Almanac. Shaun is, as I said, a tremendous woman and an example for other women to follow, and a daughter of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And so what inspired you, Shaun, to go to the Naval Academy? What kind of, upbringing did you have there in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania?
I would say we took a trip as a family when I was 8 years old to Eastern Maryland. And one of the days my parents took me to the Naval Academy and let me roam around to look at the old buildings and just walk about the yard. I didn't know it was called the yard at the time. And I think that put a bug in me. And by junior high, I had done enough research that I figured out I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I wanted to major in electrical engineering, and I wanted to fly for the Navy. And by 7th, 8th grade, I had put my mind to it and committed everything I could to making that a path come to reality. And fortunately for me, it did.
Well, I think I want to tease out that one point that you said you were committed to do anything. And I think that's a message that young people need to realize, is that you have to have your eye on something and then be committed to do what is required to get there. So electrical engineering, what inspired you to do electrical engineering?
I'm not 100% sure, but I rediscovered, and it brought back a memory, cleaning up my parents' house, that I took a tour to the nuclear plant that's in our local area. And this is long before 9/11 and those facilities were closed. So as a student, I remember being in the control room, and I also remember walking around, being on top of the reactor and seeing how the energy was made. And I was fascinated by electricity, just fascinated by it. And so somehow that put a bug in me that that's something I wanted to do. And again, a little bit blind, but that's what I've been able to piece together as how I decided and had that desire to be able to put in a lot of hard work when I didn't always get it, and continue to persevere in spite of being challenged by the academics, while I was at the academy.
I have to point out, I too was fascinated with electricity as a kid and did all sorts of experiments and thought I would go into electrical engineering. And then I was then, like you, just happenstance fascinated with nuclear energy and went into the Naval Academy's program of marine engineering. I don't think they have that anymore, but it has, nuclear and fossil fuel power plants. But electrical engineering, for anybody listening here, thank you, Mom, for your comments. That electrical engineering, we called it cables, and those of us that were in other majors took a lighter version of electrical engineering called wires. And so you graduated with your degree in cables, electrical engineering, which is no small feat. I bet you when you chose that major, there might have been 100 people in electrical engineering and only graduated a handful that hadn't dropped down to general engineering. Would that be a true statement?
It's awfully close to those numbers. I don't remember if it was 100 or 75, but we only ended up with 26.
That's an amazing,
that's what I remember.
A 75% attrition rate. All right, so you graduated from the Naval Academy in 1993, and wasn't it 1994 that they established by law that women could participate in any combat role? Is that correct?
It was around that time that the law and the policy, because the law got changed and then the policy for DOD got changed. And if you remember, I don't know if this was just naivety or what, but I knew I wanted to fly in junior high. And my plan had always been to fly combat aircraft. No one ever told me, and I never realized that when I went to the Naval Academy in 1989, there was no way in the world I could actually do what I had planned to do. And again, for naivety's sake or sheer determination, I never let that dissuade me from pursuing what I wanted to pursue. So I benefited from it, but it wasn't a challenge to me because I never recognized it was actually a challenge. So again, thank God for naivety, because it's nice when ignorance is bliss and it benefits you.
Oh, absolutely. And again, so one of our mutual friends who was a tremendous golfer said you have to will the ball down the fairway. And so you basically willed your way into combat aviation. And I think there's a message in there, again, a message of commitment, a message of having a vision and pursuing that vision and changing the world around you. So your paths and my paths crossed when you came to, after you went through flight school, got your wings of gold, which is very difficult to do. You wound up at then Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron Light 41 to fly the SH-60B. Now, I will recall one memory of interacting with Ensign McAndrew. We had a personnel problem, and you charged into my office and said, "Don't worry, Skipper, I'll take care of this." So here you were, a young ensign. We won't have to go into details, but you were a young ensign that was take charge leader already. And I think that was something developed from junior high, middle school, through high school, through the Naval Academy, of you, again, having that vision. So you went through HSL 41, got qualified in the SH-60B, and then where did you head from there?
From there, I went to HSL 43, the Battle Cats, the next door neighbor to 41. So I think it was a whole great big 50 feet down the hall from where I started and had first met you, and had a really interesting and amazing experience there at 43.
So when you say that, you pique our interest. This was basically, you were in the first cadre of women to fly operationally in the LAMPS helicopter, which for our listeners is a helicopter that flies off the back of destroyers and cruisers and lands in a little 24-foot circle day and night. So how did you see the transition as we put women on detachments?
That was an interesting transition. I was fortunate that I was not quite the lead person. There were 5 or 6 women in my squadron ahead of me who had already done a deployment. So there were a few people that we could talk to and use as a sounding board. And then our sister squadron, HSL 45, was also integrated with women. So we did have the ability to talk to, those women and their experiences. I would say it was easier for the squadrons to integrate us than the ships. At that time, there were really no ships that were truly integrated. Berthing, bathroom facilities were just not ready. And, time, money, and how the Navy works, everybody did the best that they could. Our bathroom for my first deployment was the medical bathroom. And that's what myself and my roommate had to use. So we had to go further than everyone else. And that's how the ship accommodated us. And that was more on the logistics than the actual acceptance.
Yeah, so those that are listening may not understand that there's the surface Navy, which has a personality, then the aviation Navy, which has a personality. And as a commanding officer out in Japan, I know that the surface officers were a little bit apprehensive about having women in their wardroom. And and joining a ship. So we not only had logistical barriers to hurdle, but also philosophical and personality issues. Did you see it that way?
You know, I don't know why, but we didn't seem to have those kinds of issues. We did the one place I saw it was we did an exercise where it was a proof of concept that the strike group commander wanted to take the detachment. We had 2 helicopters and take one of them and put it on a destroyer that did not have a hangar. And so as a proof of concept, I was selected to be the junior pilot that would go. And that ship really was ill prepared and really didn't want me to come. And I was fortunate because my boss was like, well, this is the person coming, figure it out. And I think there was a lot more acceptance. Once you prove that you can do your job and that you are competent, I found a lot of those barriers started to melt away. And that's one of the things I did for my first tour was I put my head down and figured out what I needed to do to get things done to accomplish the mission. And that was my focus the whole time.
And I think no matter man or woman, that is great advice for young people to, head down, butt up, work hard, and know your job and carry it out to the best of your ability, and paths will open. And it's also helpful to have a boss or whatever that doesn't equivocate. No, this is the person who is coming. So we have to have our leaders out there make those tough decisions. So you made a couple of deployments, and obviously you had fun flying off ships there in your first tour as a lieutenant JG or lieutenant junior grade and lieutenant.
I did. One of the best moments, and it wasn't flying, but it really epitomizes how I felt about the Navy. We were on our way to Australia. I know, terrible place to have to go. But we were easily halfway through the 3-week transit, and there is nothing around us, no land, no islands for miles. And I can remember looking off the deck, looking at the horizon, feeling really small as a person, but really honored to be able to serve and to be able to be part of something bigger than myself. And so that feeling, it was a feeling of awe.
Wow.
Being able to feel something, part of something bigger, but being just a small cog of it.
Wow, that story gives me a little bit of goose flesh, because those that have not served wearing the cloth of our nation don't necessarily get that feeling of serving something greater than yourself. And there is something about being at sea, and realizing the sea is so big and I am so small, But anyway, what a great story. So after 3 years at Helicopter Anti-Submarine Warfare Squadron 43, the Battle Cats in San Diego, you took a tough assignment. You went to, tell us.
Went to Bahrain to fly C-12s, which is the civilian name would be a Beechcraft 200. So it's a 7-passenger twin-engine prop plane. And I got to fly all over the Middle East.
Oh, wow. And living in Bahrain is, as a woman, it probably has its challenges that a lot of people don't understand living in an Arab country, even though it's very friendly to the United States. So tell us a little bit, besides flying people all around the Middle East, what else did you do there? Because didn't you transfer to Fifth Fleet at that point?
I did. I stayed in Bahrain for 4 years, 2 different tours. And while I was at NAVCENT, I was the helicopter warfare officer. And it was a little bit of a tumultuous time. I had transferred in December of 2002. Well, the little event of the kickoff for Iraq occurred about 3 months after I arrived at that command. not in Bahrain, but at that command. So it was a very interesting time getting all of the pieces, parts in place to keep our troops safe, as well as to execute what the nation had said, this is your mission and this is what you're going to go do.
Right. I know people will debate wars, the start of wars, things of that nature. But our job was to carry out the mission that we were assigned. And I think in doing so, you saved lives, and people don't realize that. So what are some of the challenges you faced, in that role with Fifth Fleet?
One of the interesting challenges was actually not having the clearance and not getting read in on the entire plan earlier. The office that I had, there were 3 of us in the office: helicopter, maritime, and then air control, all sat in the same office. And one evening, because everybody just stayed late, the night shift for the air shop in the classified, the higher classification section, came and read myself and the air control officer in on what the plan was. And he and I kind of looked at each other. And at that time, I knew there were going to be more than 1,000 helicopters in the Northern Arabian Gulf and in Kuwait that were looking to go forward and were operating. There was no plan with Tomahawk missiles altitude that the helicopters are going to operate at as well to deconflict that airspace. And all I could see was the flying telephone poles, going right through a helicopter that had no idea that it was coming. And so we put our heads together and figured out a process, but that was only about 3 or 4 days before we actually started. And so kind of that last minute, crap, we are putting people's lives at risk. That was definitely a challenge and was one of the reasons I continued to push to get more information, because I didn't want to be burned and put people's lives at jeopardy.
Absolutely. I mean, compartmental information sometimes is good, but other times you have to know which people to read into programs. So what an amazing challenge. And so you kept your head through that whole time, and again, used what you had built over the years of vision and doing your job and, really working hard at making sure lives were safe. So we got to commend you for that. I was at that same time in Gutter, doing information operations, which is psychological operations, and was led into a little bit more of the plan, but understood the challenges the Navy and the aviation was going to have during the start of that war. And I'll tell you, it was an interesting time, and so you were right in the thick of it. You were the female Forrest Gump. You were right from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania to the, and when you say flying telephone poles, you mean the Tomahawk missiles that went in there, that they are programmed on a path, and if a helicopter's in the way, it's going to go right through it. So good on you for solving that problem. And as a young, had you even been selected for lieutenant commander at that point, or were you a lieutenant?
No, I was selected at that time.
Okay, so a brand new, fresh caught lieutenant commander. As Mona Admiral said, the Navy is filled with young studs, old fuds, and lieutenant commanders. So lieutenant commander is like the backbone of the Navy. So you were able to leave there and head to Hawaii. Is that correct?
I did. We were able to have the Aloha spirit. One other wonderful memory of Bahrain is I actually met my husband there. He worked for Naval Criminal Investigative Service, so Bahrain will always have a warm place in my heart. So I came to Bahrain as an I, and I left as a we. And we were able to go to Hawaii. The nice thing is NCIS, where there are major bases, they have a footprint as well. So we were able to travel for the most part together and go into the Easy Riders. I've always said the Easy Riders have the best FOD walk down in the world, because you're looking up at the Ko'olau Mountains as you're sitting there walking in the morning. And that will always be a wonderful memory for me, being there in Hawaii and just the amount of beautiful landscape that we were able to see and take in.
Oh, absolutely. And so I also want to commend you. A lot of people don't realize that a woman can have a accomplished military career, have a family, and be a mother, so you've not only a woman of STEM, you're a spouse and a mother, and you've balanced it all, and being a combat pilot. So what were you doing in HSL 37, the Easy Riders? That was my first squadron, and my mother thought I had joined a motorcycle gang, the Easy Riders. But yeah, Hawaii is a beautiful tour, and I still, when I hear doves, I think of those mornings in Hawaii of the cooing doves, the chirping geckos on our walls. Anyway, so that was your department head tour. Tell us a little bit about being an officer in charge of a detachment.
It was one of my most fun and probably hardest tours. I love that you highlighted lieutenant commanders, because as I looked back, it's the real transition period where you're no longer accepted as a junior officer, but you really haven't made it yet to the senior officer ranks. And in aviation, it's truly a time to rise to the occasion. And it's a huge rite of passage going from what you had known as a JO, and you may have had a few people under you, but then you have a group of 5 pilots and another 20-some maintainers and aircrew that you now have 2 bosses that you have to reconcile and get the mission done while taking care of everyone else. It's a phenomenal experience, and you really get to imprint and grow those people. And I was blessed to have a really strong senior enlisted, and I leaned on him significantly. And I was also blessed to have a really good ship. The ship CO was demanding, but he was also very supportive and expected us to really be part of the ship. I ended up finding myself not just mentoring my own detachment, but I was mentoring, other surface warfare officers, just because they had, an outside sounding board, and another, an 04, someone who's been there and done that. Or at least that's how they looked at it. I guess I had them fooled, to how to handle different situations, different personal situations, or different mission aspects. Because leading is all about people, and we're all a little bit different, and everybody, is value added, and how do you get them to see their own potential and go after it?
Oh, I think you really hit on a key point, that leadership is about people. And sometimes individuals think, I'm going to command a ship, or I'm going to command a squadron. And I had an admiral tell me it's not about, you don't command helicopters or buildings or ships. You command people. And the other thing is, people that don't understand, so ONC stands for Officer in Charge. So you were in charge of a couple of helicopters, 5 additional pilots, 20 people, and then you were augmented and sent to a ship and had to integrate with the ship. What a tremendous amount of responsibility that many of your classmates who are still lieutenant commanders at that point have not had that opportunity. I know in the fighter community, it's amazing. You can be a lieutenant commander and you're the branch officer in the maintenance department, in charge of the tool room. And here you are in charge of helicopters flying off ships at night around the world. And when I was commanding officer of a squadron like that, other squadron COs from different communities said, how do you sleep at night? knowing that you have lieutenant commanders out there making this life and death decisions? Well, because we groom them to do that. So the mentorship, I think, is a tremendous point. So you're developing your leadership skills, your management of people. And so what was next for you? Didn't you then get the lucky job of spending a year in Iraq?
I won the lottery. I ended up getting selected to go to be a budget analyst in Iraq and work for Multinational Forces Iraq. That is the senior four-star headquarters, or that was the senior four-star headquarters at the time. General Petraeus was in charge. And I still have to say it's Navy logic where you send a double-E helicopter pilot to go do money. Didn't make sense to me, but I did the best I could.
Well, that's the other thing is people don't realize that when you're in the Navy, you're given an assignment and expected to learn and do it. And then you get out into civilian world and apply for a job, and they go, you don't have any qualifications or experience in this position. And you have to tell them, that's been my whole Navy life, is going into jobs that maybe I had little or no experience. So then you excelled at that and spent a year in Iraq. What were the conditions like for you in Iraq?
I was fortunate because I was in the green zone. And so that area is in the center of Baghdad, and it housed not just the Multinational Force Iraq staff, it also housed the State Department staff. It held the Iraqi leadership, including the Ministry of Defense, and it also housed Multinational Security Transition Command Iraq. We called it MNSTCI for short, and they were responsible for the development or reestablishment of the security forces, both defense and internal, for the Iraqi government. And I was a liaison officer to that command, and in the comptroller's office was pretty amazing because we had over $16 billion of authority that we were looking at over different fiscal years that we were able to use that were direct appropriations from Congress. We had congressional delegations coming through quite regularly and normally had to justify working through the Joint Staff a number of questions as to how are we actually building the capacity of the Iraqi forces. And so I did get to work with the general in charge there because, as my boss used to say, strategy without funding is hallucination. And he was the person who had the money and could justify the money to make the general's vision actually come forward to actually help the Iraqi people establish it. So it was a very fascinating time period. The conditions that was also 2007 to 2008 when the uprisings were going on in Baghdad. So it was not safe. There was a lot of mortar fire that came in. During the month of February and March, every day there was probably 3 salvos that were targeted at the green zone. Had situations where members of the command I was at were killed working out in the gym. And it missed me only because that was my laundry day. Otherwise, I probably would have been in the gym. So it's a little bit sobering as to, how fragile life is, as well as you can't give into those fears because you still have a job to do and work your way through it.
Wow. Very moving story. And a lot of people don't understand that the individuals that go into making all this happen in Iraq and Afghanistan and the commitment of all the individuals in your job of saving lives. But you excelled in every assignment, and so therefore you were selected to command a Navy helicopter squadron. And I want to, for our listeners, the odds of being selected for command in our community are 1 in 5. And so the selection rate is one of the lowest rates. So you really have to be a superstar. And Shaun definitely was a superstar. So tell us a little bit about going to command.
Going to command was exciting, fascinating, and overwhelming too. I was selected. It became then HSM 41, so your old command. So I was able to be in the office of which I first came in as an ensign to CU, have that experience. But that time, we were actually transitioning the entire community from the old helicopter to the new helicopter. And so we got to fly, new car smell and all of the fun that you enjoy with a new car. Multiply that by 10 and you start to come close to the excitement of being able to fly a new aircraft. With that, we were also responsible for transitioning other squadrons en masse from the legacy aircraft to the new aircraft. So in addition to having to put over 200 pilots and aircrew through every year, we also transitioned about one squadron a year. So that's another 200 people to train between the pilots, the aircrew, and the maintenance personnel. So there was a pretty heavy lift during the time that I was there. And, it's amazing because the talent that we had in the officer, in the wardroom, was amazing, and I couldn't have done it without them.
No, that was an awesome accomplishment to transition the fleet from the SH-60 Bravo to the MH-60 Romeo, a technology leap of, a tremendous technology relief that what the Romeo can do. And one of the things that I found in our community is that engineers and everybody develop these systems, these aircraft and their capabilities, and then you give them to a lieutenant commander, and they multiply the capabilities by finding out different ways to use them. And so that is part of your experience. So when you completed there, you then had to go do your time in another battle zone, Washington, D.C. So tell us what you did there.
I was I was at the Senior Navy Headquarters, the CNO's, Chief of Naval Operations Staff, and I was in plans and policy, specifically Navy policy, which is really a more term for taking care of a lot of big picture items that until that time I really hadn't worried about. So my portfolio was global posture, meaning the footprint that the Navy has around the world. So bases like you said you were in Japan, places like Bahrain, all of that force presence and where we have agreements with other countries fell into what I did on a day-to-day basis. So it was interesting because I worked with the Office of Secretary of Defense quite regularly, as well as the Secretary of Navy staff on the administrative side, because there were a lot of international issues that had to be dealt with. And you had to be very careful because we were there at the behest of our allies, and we have to be mindful of what is going on in their world because otherwise we can't accomplish what our goals are if we don't help them accomplish what their goals are.
And that process makes you an international diplomat and culturally sensitive to other nations. I think a lot of times in the United States, we think that everybody else thinks like us and his culture is the same. So what a challenge. Now, were you then able to go in residence to National War College? Is that, did you do it in residence? I mean, meaning go spend a year at National War College?
I was very fortunate to have the support to finally go to War College. When I was coming out of Iraq, I actually had orders to Marine Corps University. And because of how the slates and the timing worked, those orders got canceled. So I had been asking for about 6 years to be able to go to War College. And so finally I've been able to now go to War College, which was really exciting. And that year was very, very eye-opening. And the quality of personnel, both in the service, because it's a joint civilian and international student body, and the quality of people I met from all walks of life, all services, and a number of countries was simply amazing. And we learned from each other as much as we learned from the instructors. And it was truly a really fascinating time, and it was a great learning experience.
No, you really captured what I saw. I didn't get to attend, but I was the commandant of the Eisenhower School, formerly the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, there at National Defense University. The Tigers, your counterpart to the National War College. And I called it halftime. So I wanted the students to, reevaluate themselves, reflect on their military careers and their civilian careers, take a deep breath, readjust, and go into the next phase of their career. And I think it was halftime for you, because the way I look at it, you then went into a new era of your leadership, and that was preparing young men and women to lead. And I think you did that for the next, I'll call it the next 7 to 8 years. So you then left there and went to the United States Naval Academy, your alma mater, as a battalion officer. And as a midshipman, everybody runs and hides from battalion officers. So how was it being that person?
It was unusual. And the unusual part was you're walking around the halls, which you walked around as a young, impressionable adult, and you have all of those memories, and you have all of those thought patterns, and they're in your memory. But experience has tempered you to have additional thoughts and additional experiences. And I laughed to myself so many times when a midshipman would come into my office with the next great idea. And the thought that would run across my mind was, I remember when I thought like that. And then I would proceed to ask them a few questions which they had not yet asked themselves. And they would often be crestfallen because I didn't just agree with what they wanted to do or with their idea. And then they went back, and it reminded me of being a junior officer. I didn't have all of the questions to ask myself at that time either. And they would go back and they would come back with a much better plan and a much better idea. So you saw reflections of yourself in so many of the midshipmen. The academic dean and provost, Andy Phillips, at the time when I came back, said midshipmen are always 18 to 23. They never get older. And it was such a true statement. And the lessons that they had to learn are always the same, because you're always getting a new group.
No, it's like being a flight instructor. You see the same mistakes over and over again. I remember doing an auto rotation as an instructor pilot, and my student said, "Was your hand on the collective?" And I go, "My hand is always on the collective when doing an auto rotation." Many people listening won't know what that is, but that's for the benefit of Shaun. And so you taught ethics and moral reasoning. Was that at ROTC, or was that at as the battalion officer? Did you also have some academic responsibilities?
It was actually at both. So as a battalion officer, there's the opportunity to be able to teach one section, which is taught to sophomores, third class in our vernacular. college sophomores about leadership or about ethics and moral reasoning in how to make good decisions. In NROTC, I was responsible for teaching a very similar course, which we taught to seniors at that time.
Okay, so I want to make the distinction that after a tour as battalion officer at the Naval Academy, you were selected for what would be considered a major command, and that was to go to lead the Navy Reserve Officer Training Corps unit at the University of Idaho up in Coeur d'Alene. And so there you're taking civilian college students and turning them into naval officers on a much not as intense program as the Naval Academy. So tell us about transitioning from battalion officer at the Naval Academy to commanding officer of an ROTC unit.
It was a lot of fun, and because I had been dealing and developing midshipmen already, I was really looking forward to it. The one part that made me sad, because of the schedule of a university college student, is I didn't get to see my battalion members as much as I had seen my midshipmen in my battalion at the Naval Academy. As a battalion officer, my office was actually in the dormitory, Bancroft Hall. So every day I had interactions with a number of midshipmen. In NROTC, the requirement is once a week to be able to see them, and a couple of times for physical training. So the personal interaction of walking around, they just weren't around. They had other classes and other responsibilities themselves. And so I missed having much more of that daily interaction across the board, and which is why I really enjoyed the classes teaching, because I got to have that interaction a couple of times a week.
So this is the coming up to the culmination of your career of being a battalion officer, of midshipman at the Naval Academy, of being the professor of naval science at the University of Idaho. And so in those roles, and because you're in the academic world, you must have reflected on your philosophy and that of leadership. Would that be a correct statement?
That would be a very correct statement.
So tell, my philosophy is, desire, commitment, responsibility, accountability, and go through that program, which has been discussed on previous episodes of the Admiral's Almanac. What is your theory on leadership, and how do you convey that? But I want to go back to, I'm going to jump back because you talked about teaching ethics and moral reasoning. In today's world, we need moral reasoning and ethics more than anything because of the challenges we face globally, locally. Even in cybersecurity, you can have all the technology you want, but if you don't have people of character, of ethics, of moral reasoning in the loop, you're going to have major problems. So I wanted to interject that. Back to you on your philosophy on leadership. What did you develop?
My philosophy that I've developed is think forward, choose excellence. And it's a motto. The motto I had given my NROTC battalion was actually think forward, think excellence. And about a year and a half into it, I recognized, it's actually choose excellence. So especially one of the largest challenges young adults have is time management and prioritization. And I saw it at the Naval Academy, and I saw it at University of Idaho. It's a struggle. They have not necessarily done it, and they don't necessarily know how to prioritize. What I did with the students at ROTC is give them the mission, which is to develop morally, mentally, and physically. And they wanted me to pick one of the three that they had to focus on. And I told them, no, you're going to be a naval officer. You actually need to figure out which one is the highest priority for you at that moment, and focus your heart on that. But then in the next moment, you may have to change your priority and focus and give the time to it. So the idea was think forward. What were the things that you can take care of and you can plan for to make it easier on yourself? And choose excellence. You have a choice in the matter. What is going to get you the best outcome for what you want to accomplish? And so it was something that I had taught to them from day one. And it really started to take hold after a few years. As many people know, culture change is a challenge, and getting people to adopt a new motto or a new vision to buy into it does take a lot of effort and consistency across the board. So I was able to use stories and relate it to that saying often enough that they actually started to use it. And I wanted them to have a technique that they could use from day one through day last that would actually help them figure out their priorities, manage their time, which would allow them to take care of their future sailors and their future bosses.
What a great philosophy. It sounds like something that needs to be put into a book there, Shaun. And I think we can work on that. I will tell you, at one point in my career, I talked about choose greatness. And so choosing excellence, I think, takes it to puts a finer point on it, because we have so many choices. As I tell young sailors, you can choose to stay up to 2:00 in the morning playing video games, or you can choose to go to bed and get 8 hours of sleep before you report for duty. So choosing excellence, I think then the next point is through education, through your teaching ethics and moral reasoning, give them an example of what is excellence and how to make those choices. So think forward, choose excellence. I think that would be a tremendous topic to share to those that need a keynote speaker. Shaun McAndrew would be wonderful at any event if you want to learn about science, technology, engineering, and math, and how women are just as good as anyone else on the planet in engineering and math, and maybe even more so. Also, I think Shaun could talk to your group on ethics, strategy, executive development. And so if you're not bringing Shaun McAndrew into your organization to speak, why, you're spending your money in the wrong areas. So I need people out there to think forward, choose excellence, choose Shaun McAndrew, choose her example of leadership. Again, I'm so impressed with not only your Navy Wings of Gold, but Legion of Merit Medal, Bronze Star, multiple meritorious service medals, Air Medal, Navy Commendation Medal. I mean, is there any medal you didn't get? Well, definitely had a distinguished career. Is there anything you'd like to share to wrap up our discussion today?
Excellent question. I'm really honored for you to take the time to have mentored me over the number of years and have always done it with a sense of humor, which I've admired. And you continue to lead through humor and really make an impact and be memorable. And I have greatly appreciated that my entire career, since I've known you pretty darn close to my entire career.
Absolutely. I think of, I was just talking to one of our squadron mates, Steve Green, last night, and talked about humor. And I was put on report by a company officer at the Naval Academy for going over the wall and wearing civilian clothes. And that lieutenant was Lieutenant Michael G. Mullen. And I don't know what happened to him. All right, Shaun, this has been an outstanding catch-up. It's been an outstanding discussion of your career and the things you learned during your career. And again, ethics, moral reasoning, thinking forward, choosing excellence. You're a great example to be highlighted during a month where we're celebrating women of distinction and you certainly are a woman of distinction, a mother, a spouse, an engineer, a naval officer, and now an industry vice president. So good luck, and thank you for joining the Admiral's Almanac in our series of Council of Captains.